Hey everyone! Thanks for checking out my latest retrospective. Today we're doing kind of a side shoot to the PS4. We're going to cover the PSVR. So I'm covering this stuff separately from the PS4 stuff because, if you don't have a PSVR, you can't really check it out. And if you plan to get a PSVR later, now you can just check out all the great stuff for it separately. Since this is the first part of my retrospective series on the PSVR, I'm going to go through kind of the launch year. I'm going to cover all of the games that came out that year because there weren't that many. And I'm going to go through the system so you know a bit more about it if you just aren't that aware about it. VR hype was huge leading up to 2016. We had the kickstarted Oculus Rift, the first edition of that had come out. I'm not sure if the HTC Vive was already out by then or just planned to come out, but that was making big waves. But those were pretty pricey and required a pretty powerful PC to use. So when Sony announced that their headset was coming out, and it was a bit cheaper, still a little pricey, but quite a bit more affordable than those, a lot of fans were excited for that. If you already had a PS4, it was a perfect way to get into VR. Still a step down from those, but quite a step up from those like put your phone in them headsets. If you're interested in the history of VR, I recommend looking up all the launch stuff surrounding the Vive and Rift and the PSVR. There's a lot of really cool stories about the challenges they had to overcome and, the way that these different devices tried to compete against each other, what they were bringing to the market that was different, just a lot of really cool stuff around that. Technically, the biggest drawback to the PSVR versus those other ones is the resolution. Inside here is a single screen that's 1080p, so 1920 by 1080, that's split between the two eyes, which is quite a bit down from the other ones, and it's pretty noticeable if you compare them side by side. The original release also had some challenges with the box that comes with it that you plug into your PS4. It didn't pass through the HDR signal, so if you wanted to play HDR games and had the VR hooked up, you'd have to swap cables between them. It was a real kind of sloppy mess. The PSVR launched on October 13th, 2016, and it was around the same time as the PS4 Pro. If you had or have a Pro, the performance was a bit better. There were two bundles at launch. This is actually a later bundle, so yeah, the original launch bundle didn't look like this, but there were two offers. You could get the one that came with some Move controllers and the PlayStation VR Worlds game. And then there was a second bundle that didn't come with that game and didn't have the controllers. If you don't know, these controllers were actually released for the PS3 originally. They were kind of the PS3's take on Wii motion controls and didn't really do that well, but they repurposed them for the PS4, and if you have these old controllers, there's the Move controller and the navigation controller, you can use these with some games that require them. I know a lot of people have problems with older ones where the batteries won't charge anymore, so you might just want to check that. None of mine have failed, so I've had good luck with them, but I know it's been a common problem. So yeah, let's get into the games. In this video, we're covering the physical releases for the PSVR in 2016. To keep this shorter, we'll do the downloadable stuff in a separate video. But yeah, let's get right into the launch date, October 13th, where there were 9 launch games released. First up is the demo disc. This is now volume 1 of the demo disc. There's 3 out right now, but yeah, let's talk about the first one. I think this is the only one that came out physically. I'm sure I'll find out if 2 came out next year, but yeah. This disc includes a ton of short demos for VR games. Some of them I even used for the footage I captured here if I didn't own the game. Most notably though, it includes the kitchen demo. This is the first teaser for Resident Evil 7. It was a really cool VR thing, a horror thing that no one knew what it was until eventually it came out that was the original demo for Resident Evil 7, what became Resident Evil 7. So it's really cool to have physically on this disc for Resident Evil fans or just collectors in general. Next up is PlayStation VR Worlds. Now that's kind of the showpiece of the system. This launch bundle pack-in was a series of minigames made for VR by Sony's London studios. It includes 5 minigames. The first is the London Heist, an action title with driving and shooting segments. Then Ocean Descent, which has you descending into the shark-infested waters. Luge is, like it sounds, a downhill luge racer experience where you dodge various obstacles while you're going down a street. Danger Ball is a 3D Pong kind of game where you use your head to hit the ball back. and Scavenger's Odyssey is a sci-fi space-themed shooter. The disc was also available separately, and it's pretty easy to find if you didn't get that original bundle. The games are a good showcase of what the new hardware could do, and they're more complete experiences than the demo disc, but nothing quite like a full game in terms of content. Batman Arkham VR was one of the best looking launch VR games by the developers of the Batman Arkham series. This game takes place between Arkham City and Arkham Knight and has Batman searching for Nightwing and Robin who've disappeared. Like a lot of other VR games, you teleport. There's no free walk in this one. That helps with motion sickness, but can feel a bit weird if you're not used to it. The game focuses entirely on first-person puzzle solving using Batman's gadgets, and there's no combat. To solve the puzzles, you can use the Batarang, the grappling hook gun, and the forensic scanner, which, like the previous Arkham games, lets you recreate and explore crime scenes. Battlezone is next. This is a reboot of Atari's arcade tank combat game from the 80s. Battlezone puts you in control of a tank in a futuristic environment to take on a series of missions. Throughout the campaign, you'll unlock different tanks, weapons, and special equipment to customize your loadout. Missions are procedurally generated to make them more replayable. The game also features 4-player online co-op, which was a big point at the time. Later, you could get this game as Battlezone Gold Edition, which didn't use VR, and it's still pretty cool to check out that way, but I recommend checking out the VR version if you have a chance. Driveclub VR was a big game for racing fans at the time, a reworked version of the original Driveclub that was made specifically for VR. The game featured 80 cars, which is less than the original, but they have interiors modeled so you can look around inside them, which is pretty cool for VR. The game had 114 tracks, including all of the tracks from the main game and many of the DLC tracks. It features a single-player career mode and an online multiplayer mode. Eve Valkyrie was a pretty cool title for VR at the time. It's a space combat game set in the Eve Online universe where you play as a pilot who keeps getting cloned to retake part in battle and remembers all of your past experiences. The game features a number of single-player missions in the Chronicles campaign, but the main focus is its 8-player multiplayer modes. The game featured several updates throughout its launch year, including new mechanics, maps, and modes, and eventually a non-VR version was released. Of those, the most notable addition was the Carrier Assault mode, which channels the ending of Star Wars and has you flying through a trench along a huge ship to destroy its core. Job Simulator is a kind of parody minigame collection. It has you playing the role of various robots in a job museum where you can play as a cashier, chef, mechanic, and office worker. Each job has a series of objectives to complete, including some pretty silly ones that tie into the job in interesting ways. The objectives can be completed a number of different ways, making use of the physics engine and the move controllers to affect the environment. I think this is the rarest physical release actually, definitely for this year, so if you see it for a decent price and are into collecting stuff, I recommend picking it up. Loading Human Chapter 1 is a port of a sci-fi adventure Kickstarter game that was for the Rift originally. The game is the first chapter in a 3-part trilogy. It stars the character Prometheus, who's traveling to an energy source in space that will help save his father's life. The player will also relive fragments of Prometheus' memories, which include his training and the events leading up to his mission. The story and atmosphere are pretty good, but the controls had some issues. There's been no word on Chapter 2 since this has come out, so I think the franchise is pretty much done. Riggs Mechanized Combat League is a 3-on-3 FPS with action and sports-based modes that can be played in single-player or online multiplayer. The game puts you in control of an armed mech competing in various arena games. Aside from the standard team deathmatch, there's also the Power Slam mode, where you have to get your mech into overdrive and jump through a hoop to score points, or the End Zone mode, where you have to take control of a holographic ball to score points in the opposite goal. Until Dawn Rush of Blood is an on-rails shooter by the creators of Until Dawn. It shares the same name and some of the environments, but doesn't feature huge connections. The game has the player riding a roller coaster through 7 levels themed on different nightmare environments. It includes a carnival, a slaughterhouse, hotel, prison, and several stages that take place in settings from the original game. Each level includes branching paths, collectibles, power-ups, and hidden videos that add more to the story. And with the launch stuff all out of the way, let's move into the games that came out through the rest of the year. There weren't that many, but some notable ones. Eagle Flight is a game where you're an eagle fighting for survival. You have to build nests on different landmarks in a post-apocalyptic abandoned version of Paris. You have to avoid crashing into buildings and taking out other flying animals, but the game pretty much follows the standard Ubisoft open world design. So there's collectibles, challenges, side missions like races, and more. It also features a 3-on-3 multiplayer capture the flag mode. Robinson: The Journey was developed by Crytek, who were best known for the original Far Cry and Crysis games. It was built on the latest version of the CryEngine for the time, and it's a sci-fi adventure mashup of Lost in Space and Land of the Lost. After a crash landing on Tyson 3, a stranded boy named Robin searches for all other survivors on a planet still roamed by dinosaurs. Gameplay involves staying alive and solving some environmental puzzles while progressing through it. Robin is joined by the ship's AI unit Higgs and a baby T-Rex who help him throughout his adventure. Werewolfs Within is a multiplayer social game made for VR that's an interesting video game take on popular deception-based card games like Werewolf. In the game, the villagers sit in a circle trying to determine who is the werewolf among them. You only have 7 minutes to decide, so the games go by pretty quick. Each character has their own abilities which can be used to help identify the werewolf through process of elimination, as long as they don't get caught up in any of the lies trying to trick them. Some of the abilities make interesting use of the VR mechanics for a game where you just sit in one place. The animated characters also really bring the game to life. Lastly, there were a couple games that weren't full VR releases, but they added modes or were updated to include VR-specific content. So let's go through those. Hatsume Miku Project Diva X adds a little bit of VR functionality here in the View Concert mode. You can basically use your VR to see some of the concerts you've put together from different angles. It's an interesting use of the headset, but not really too much here to check out. Rise of the Tomb Raider Blood Ties, this was a pretty big deal at the time. This was something that Sony really hyped up as an exclusive piece of content for their release of Rise of the Tomb Raider, which was already an Xbox exclusive for quite a while. This new Blood Ties storyline takes place between the prologue and the rest of the game, with Lara exploring Croft Manor, which is falling apart, to discover what happened to her mother. Her uncle Atlas is trying to take control of her family assets. Unless she can figure out what happened to her family, he's going to kick her out of the mansion, and that leads to this kind of interesting narrative setup. The game features all exploration, there's no combat. Like other games, you have to teleport around. That just keeps down the motion sickness that you experience with VR, but pretty early on you can unlock the free roam mode and just move around like you want. Overall, it's a bit rough for an early VR experience. The moving is very slow, probably not the best showcase for VR, and the mode itself is pretty much just better and easier to play without VR, so just interesting to note that this came out and that you can play this mode with VR, but not really necessary. Res Infinite is next, and this was available physically only online through IM8bit's website, but was still available for a good bit after release, I think at least a year, so I'm not considering a limited release. I'm not sure the exact date. I have it marked here as October 13th because that's when the digital version came out and when this version was supposed to come out, but I do know it was delayed and I feel like it may not have arrived in people's homes until December-ish, but it did come out this year. If you don't know, Res is a cult trance shooter that originally launched on the PS2 and has had several updates over the generations. This Infinite version includes the new Area X level, which featured slightly different take on the gameplay formula, but more importantly, this episode was kind of designed around VR. The rest of the areas are still pretty cool too, but they're not quite designed for VR, so they're a little more intense. There is an option to turn down how crazy the camera moves around, and that makes it a little easier for people who are just getting into VR, but you can still experience it its original way in VR too. Trackmania Turbo also got a VR's level update. This latest entry in the Cult PC Racing series, and the only entry available for consoles in the series, included a free VR update this year. The update featured a new VR campaign which has 40 tracks set in 4 environments. They have been designed specifically for VR, so they're a bit less intense than the standard tracks, but that just makes a smoother experience when playing with VR. You can also play those tracks for multiplayer races online with VR. So yeah, that's it for the 2016 launch year for the PSVR. Quite a bit of cool stuff. It's a great start for the platform, some really interesting games. We're going to go through the downloadable stuff soon, and we'll get to the later years soon after that. There's some really cool stuff coming out each year for the PSVR. It seems like it's slowed down a little now, but with the 5 on the horizon, it'll be interesting to see how it picks up or doesn't. Thanks for checking out this retrospective. I'm going to keep going with all my other retrospectives too. I've fallen a bit behind on those, but don't worry, those are coming. So yeah, thanks for checking this out, and I hope you discovered some cool games.
It's appreciation time! Reward Mike's hard work by subscribing. Otherwise, we might see you in the next class trial.